This episode of the Culture Study Podcast is brought to you by bookshop.org. Whether you're looking for a buzzy new memoir or a riveting true crime or a fantasy novel that absolutely immerses you for your entire week, bookshop.org has just the book you're looking for. And when you purchase from bookshop.org, you're supporting local independent bookstores so they can continue to foster culture, curiosity, and a love of reading in your community. Right now, I'm reading Tommy Orange's Wandering Stars, which you can get on bookshop.org. It was actually a featured read a little while ago, and it's amazing. I also love linking out to bookshop.org for all of the books that we feature here on the Culture Study Podcast and in the Culture Study newsletter, because it's a really great way, if for some reason you are not in proximity to your local bookstore, for you to support it, because there's money that comes from every sale and goes directly to the bookstore of your choice. In just over 4 years, bookshop.org has raised over $30 million for local bookstores. They're unapologetically anti-Amazon, and they believe local bookstores are essential community hubs that foster culture, curiosity, and a love of reading. Bookshop.org is committed to helping them survive and thrive. They're a certified B Corp and were named Best for the World by B Labs. So feel good about where you buy books. And right now, you can use the code CULTURE to get 10% off your next order at bookshop.org. That's promo code CULTURE for 10% off your next favorite book at bookshop.org. And thank you so much to bookshop.org for sponsoring this episode. Melody was like, oh, what should we do for our cold open? Like, how can we start it? And I was thinking, oh, I could go look at some of my Goodreads, like, because I never, ever look at them. And I was like, oh, I'll just go look at the ones for, like, the 1-star reviews for my first book. Like, it's far enough away.
Uh-oh. Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I read them and I was like, no. These are so mean.
Yeah.
One, no, I don't, like, they're none of my business.
They're not your business.
This is the Culture Study Podcast, and I'm Anne Helen Peterson.
I'm Maris Kreisman. I'm a writer and critic.
And you have a new column right now, right?
I have a new column for LitHub that'll be bi-weekly.
So I am very excited. I knew, like, as soon as you wrote your piece about Goodreads that, like, you were the person that I wanted to have on, because this is something that's been germinating for a long time. But
oh, yeah.
Do you use Goodreads right now?
I sure do. I use it to keep track of the books I've read.
How many books do you read, like, in a week?
2, and maybe I'll listen to one. So when people ask me, what are you reading? My mind just goes blank and I have to open my Goodreads app. So I still depend on it as a reader.
Do you write reviews?
No. And in fact, the one thing I'll say is that most of the time I'm only giving 5-star reviews to the books that I've read and want to support. And the other books I've read and don't want to support don't get onto my Goodreads account.
I do not use it at all. And I think that has a lot to do with being an author, and you're an author as well. I think that I hadn't started using it before I was an author. And so by the time I started considering even using it, when my first book came out in like 2014, it was already a place where I knew I shouldn't hang out. Or didn't want to hang out as a person who is also an author. Maybe I would be curious to hear your experience with this. Like, it's just too hard to avoid accidentally seeing what other people are saying about you if you're in this space.
100%.
And like, I already saw a lot of what people said about me on Twitter and like, and writing other articles and that sort of thing. And it's not that I don't ever want to hear people's critique of my work. It's that there is danger, I think, in only understanding your work through the lens of people who are not professional critics, right? Like this is a distinction that I think we will get a lot more into.
Absolutely. And I think it's great that people who aren't critics have a space to talk about books. But then, as you just told me, it's none of your business. It's none of your business what they say.
I feel like that's an old Nicole Cliff piece of advice. Nicole Cliff, who former co-editor of The Toast, and also the way I first discovered Nicole's work was on the Hairpin, and that sometimes she would say that other people's opinion of me is none of my business, and that has stuck with me for a very long time.
And it's a good rule of thumb.
So you wrote this op-ed for the New York Times, and I feel like this is something that you had probably written in some form in your mind many, many different times.
Oh, yes.
But can you, the title of it is Let's Rescue Book Lovers from This Online Hellscape. Can you describe, for people who aren't familiar with Goodreads, like what is it? What does it look like? What is the universe?
So Goodreads launched in 2007, I believe. And at the time, it felt like a really promising tool for anyone who cared about books, readers, authors. It was the business of authors at the time, booksellers, publishers, kind of bridging the gap between the reader and the author, which I think is really invaluable. But I think that what happened is, as has happened to many areas of social media and the internet, so it's something that started out with a really great purpose then devolves into something where misuse and bad feelings can really crowd out all of the rest.
So basically, the mechanics of it are that you can put your reading list, what you're reading, you can search through it, like you can type it in, and then essentially like affix it to your profile, and then you can rate it. It's a scale of 5 stars, right?
5 stars and no halfsies.
That's so hard.
I know.
No halfsies. And then you can also put a short review, a short or long review of how you felt about it. And then other people can see your library and all of the reviews that you've read. Like, where did it turn sour? Like, when did it start to turn into the online hellscape?
Yeah. I think very much like any other social media platform that started out kind of cool and eye-opening and making the world bigger and better often takes a turn, as we've seen. But I do think that Amazon acquired Goodreads in 2013, and I think that's really where we start to lose that community aspect.
Like, it just got too big because people could also, if they bought the book on Amazon, there was like this, I've seen this, I feel like I've seen it, this prompt that you could also review it on Goodreads, or at least like some sort of connection, right?
See, I don't buy books on Amazon, so I'm not sure. But I do know that on Goodreads, there is a link so that you can buy the Kindle version directly from Amazon.
So it's at least reverse engineered, that like there's just these integrations.
But you would think that if Amazon acquired this company, that they would know how to harness the good in it. At least to make themselves money. Like, they're losing so much money on this, and that doesn't sound very Amazonian.
Totally. Well, we're going to talk about this later, but it makes me think of like how shitty Amazon Prime is as like a viewing experience. It's like they're just spending all of this money on these expensive shows, and it still feels like it's Netflix in 2007. Like the very early first iterations of streaming, that's Amazon Prime. So can you just give us like a greatest hits of the bad things about the Goodreads experience right now?
Yeah. One thing that blows my mind is that the interface is so bad, and it's confusing to use, and it's clunky, and it clearly hasn't been updated in 10 years. Mm-hmm. And I was expecting more from an Amazon-owned site.
Maris, bless you.
Yeah. And I also do think it reached a critical mass where people were coming in who might not have the best of intentions. And just like any other area that you could be online, but Goodreads doesn't have many people there to moderate. And I think that's the big difference.
One of the fundamental things that like strikes me is that you can review a book that hasn't come out yet and that you don't have access to. So you have a memoir that you're writing.
I just turned it in this morning.
But somehow it already has some ratings on Goodreads.
It's wild. And so there are a couple of things to understand about book publishing that I struggle to understand sometimes.
Yeah.
And one thing is that word of mouth has become so important to publishers that they are giving out advanced copies of books months in advance sometimes. So there isn't a way to, tell Amazon this book publishes on this date in 2025, so no one should be able to rate until then.
Right, because the publishers want those early reviews on Goodreads, but they also can't authenticate, oh, we only sent advanced reader copies to these people and this is their Goodreads profiles, and they clearly would never give their copy to anyone else to read, because I certainly have never, ever been sent an advanced reader's copy that I've sent to someone else. But there's no authentication process that they can feasibly put in place.
So what they do, which is also mind-blowing, is that they have volunteer librarians, is what they call them.
No.
Amazon. And these librarians, out of the goodness of their hearts, have the authority to enter new books into Goodreads. And that is very helpful for these librarians who want to keep track of the books that are still coming out. But that means that then they are findable and rateable, even if the deal was just announced.
Wait, so this isn't even Amazon that puts these books on there? It's actual users, sort of like Wikipedia, who they're doing the work? These librarians are doing the work?
Well, so I think there's a feed for most of it, right? That if when Amazon gets a feed of all the basic metadata, Goodreads does too. But there are a lot of books that, there's a deal announcement before there's any other information. And these librarians can go on Publishers Marketplace and enter the book as if it were already in existence.
So then how did your unpublished book already get 2 ratings? No one wrote anything. I went to look. No one wrote anything, but they just rated it. So it's just people who are I like Maris, 5 stars.
Yes. And as flattering as that is,
it could also go the other way.
100%. And what we've been seeing is that it does go the other way very often for people who put out books that a certain public doesn't like the idea of. And that's when it gets tricky.
Okay, so tell me about this scandal involving a YA novel. I just feel like there's been so many scandals involving YA novels and YA novelists on Goodreads, so I'm trying to parse them all in my head, but there's a recent one.
It is actually not a YA novelist.
What? Okay. I'm just mapping it over. Yes, okay, anyway.
Kate Corain is her name. And she's writing a sci-fi romance novel that kind of comes out of the Star Wars fandom community, which is neither here nor there.
But it's called Crown of Starlight, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And so this up-and-coming author got this really nice book deal with a U.S. publisher and a U.K. publisher. And once again, I don't think that book was out for review. I don't think that anything was really happening with the book yet. And it was found that this author had gone on to Goodreads and created false accounts so that she could 1-star review or review bomb books of similar nature that were coming out around the same time.
Oh, so basically her class of debut authors. And she also wrote positive reviews of her book, right?
Yes.
I can see the desire to do this. You have so much anxiety about how this is going to happen. What is review bombing? Can you explain that a little bit?
Yes. So review bombing is giving one-star reviews as kind of a means of revenge or anything to kind of to bring the overall score of a book down. And because Goodreads doesn't require that you have read the book or that the book has to be out in any way before you can rate them, it's an easy way to start a book out with very bad vibes.
Yeah. And so, like, someone could, like, if she did this, I don't know, like, if she just did it on Twitter, or if she did it on, like, the Amazon review site or something like that, like, whatever. Like, what is it about? I think people are concerned about this because they think Goodreads matters so much. And this is what I think we need to somehow convey to readers who maybe don't understand, like, what's exactly going on in the publishing industry right now. Like, why does it matter so much that Goodreads can be manipulated?
Goodreads is one of the only big hubs online where book people gather. And in this age of, everybody has to follow the data, and the data means everything, so much of the experience of reading a book is subjective. Yeah. And it's incredibly hard to put numbers on whatever your gut feeling is about the latest novel you've read and the quality of its writing. So Goodreads is the one area where you can say, oh, this got 150,000 ratings. This is important.
So it's like, because we have so few places where we can talk about books and like understand if a book is popular, it becomes like a deadly weapon. Like it can be weaponized essentially.
Absolutely. And then from a critical standpoint, we've seen so many different outlets either give up on book reviewing entirely or cut back in really big ways. And so many books just don't get the media attention that they used to. And so Goodreads then takes on this outsized importance to authors and publishers because it's sometimes the only feedback that they're getting.
So what I hear you saying is that all of this is the fault of like the decline of media, just generally. Yes. But there are dots that are connected here. Like the reason that this is all so fraught is because we no longer have this robust press in so many different understandings of the word.
Absolutely. And yeah, even like Pitchfork falling under GQ was really shook me. For that same reason, there is so much good art coming out. And there will just be fewer and fewer places where people who devote their lives to the enjoyment and the study of these things can tell people about them.
Right. And also, instead of talking about the book, I think what oftentimes happens is it devolves into like, I want to talk about their online persona, or like, I really am actually talking about their online persona, but I'm going to say that I'm talking about the book. Like, that sort of thing. Like it's not actually about the book at all.
Yeah. And that's a little harder to moderate. Right. But it does seem like if there was a human reading these reviews, that they could do something about it.
Okay. This is a great tee up for our first listener question. This first one comes from Melissa, and it sets the stage for all of the other things that are going on.
I'm trying to understand Goodreads' business model. Like, how do they make money, and how does Amazon as an owner fit into it? And does that model align with how readers use or want to use the site? As a writer, I'm also curious, how do marketers, publishers, and authors think people use Goodreads? And how do people actually use Goodreads? I'd love if you could touch on the Goodreads Choice Awards, too. What purpose does it serve, and what's going on there?
Okay, this is like 17 questions,
yes.
So let's take it one question at a time. What is your understanding of the Goodreads business model?
So I just want to say, once again, like I don't work for Goodreads, and Goodreads is part of Amazon in that their business practices are opaque as hell. And so these are just informed guesses, basically.
Yes.
But I do think that there's a lot of money from advertising on Goodreads. And one of the best things about how it used to be, sorry, I sound old, like in my day, but in my day, in like 2009, a publisher could make a beautiful ad for a book that might not get any other media play from them and find a targeted audience who might appreciate that reading experience. And
Yes.
that was kind of priceless for both sides. Like, as a reader, it's nice to see ads that have some bearing on what you like to read.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember these too from like 2009, like banner ads that either found me because they were on a site like the Hairpin or the All. It was before it was more like it was like pre-cookie ads, right? Like, so it wasn't things that were stalking me across Instagram. It was just like an ad that someone had taken out to like on the NewYorker.com website or something. And I was like, huh, interesting. And as you said, like they were often very beautiful because they weren't working the same way that ads work now. So now those ads show up on Goodreads to some extent. Is that what you're saying?
So now, yeah, I'm looking at Goodreads now, and there's like a Verbo ad, and
oh no, really?
Yeah,
like it's those kind of ads?
Oh yeah, or here's Roto-Rooter, get a free quote. So it's like that experience stinks, and so I think publishers still want to use Goodreads as a marketing tool. And I think they would invest some money in it, but I think the returns are just not worth it after a while.
Yeah. I just Googled Goodreads ads and there's like all these Reddit threads about like I tried to spend my money on making Goodreads ads and that it like functions essentially like if you try to boost your post on Facebook or something like that. Like it's not doing what you think it's doing. It's not the same as a banner ad in any capacity. And then I think that there's also probably some component of this that's just like classic tech company acquisition, like conglomerate acquisition, media company where they just buy things because they're like, I guess that's in our universe.
Yep.
And we have the money and we don't like, why not? We don't want someone else to buy it. So why don't we buy it?
And then they do absolutely nothing with it. Even like in 2013, I thought, oh, well, this will be integrated so well with the Amazon book site that it'll be like a continuous communication across those two sites, and that people will be lured to the Amazon pages to buy the books, and that would be a way to monetize. That Goodreads would be one big ad for Amazon books.
Right. That's not even, they can't even do that.
Can't even do that.
Okay, from a publishing industry standpoint, how do you think that, I always think there's a difference between the actual editors and the top editors who kind of hold the purse strings. So how do the bosses think that people use Goodreads compared to how people actually use Goodreads?
I am not sure that there's much of a disconnect in that regard. I think that most people I know who work at publishers in any capacity think that people use Goodreads primarily to rate books and keep track of books, but they're just not as engaged as they had been before.
Interesting. So like people used to use Goodreads in a different way.
I think
now
so.
It's become so toxic that people don't use it in the same way.
There are still people who write amazing reviews, and you can go to their Goodreads page and learn a lot. Like my friend Adam Dalva is a power user. Roxane Gay for a while was a power user. And that is a lovely way to use Goodreads. But for the most part, that's not what we end up seeing.
It's so interesting because I feel like the original sin is that it's a social network. Mm-hmm. That's what makes it addictive, but also makes it so toxic. Like, and how one person or a very small percentage of people can ruin the experience for so many other people. Like if I go on Facebook now, the primary thing that I see is still people, older people I know, like posting pictures of their kids or like talking about a small thing in their lives that is meaningful to them, or like, I don't know, talking about an event that they're going to. And then there are just those, like the 1% that is spamming everyone with like Trump memes or whatever, right? Or like people who still need it because it's the only way that they can talk to their kids group. Like that's so many parenting things are still so incredibly localized on Facebook. But it also, like, the experience of scrolling it is just so chock full of ads that have nothing to do with anything that they're interested in, that it makes the entire experience that is otherwise just trying to figure out, like, when do we buy the uniforms for basketball or whatever? Like, turns that into a very different experience. So, it feels like the thing that made it addictive in the first place, similar to Facebook, is now the thing that makes it feel almost unusable.
I think that's right. I think that similarly, in the early days of Facebook, it was a place where you could really keep in touch with your friends. And there are a couple of friends who I really trust. And if I saw them reading a particular book, it made it on my radar. It made me put it on my to-read list. And that happens less frequently, I think, now.
I feel like I use Instagram for that purpose now. And other people that I know who work in publishing, like, or who are adjacent in some capacity, and they still use the stars, right? But they just put like the little emoji stars in the corner or something, and don't necessarily write like a full review. But it seems like people still have this urge to talk to other people about the books that they're reading, but they don't want to do it on this site any longer.
It's so funny because much like writing a book, reading a book is a lonely experience sometimes. But it's so fun to talk about with somebody else who's read what you've read and compare notes after you've read it.
Even if it's with strangers. That's the thing, is that like Charlie, my partner, just read The Bee Sting, and he is just like badgering me to start it. And I'm like, oh, is this the time I want to start an 800-page book? Instead, I am reading the book that Melody badgered me to start. And it's fun to talk about it. Like, it's so fun. And I love when someone takes my rec and then we get to talk about it. Like, this is not new in any capacity, but you put the infrastructure of like expansion and also put like the paradigms of the publishing industry into that space. Like, how do, we don't have book press anymore. How do we use it? Like, how do we decide what's going to be popular? How do we trend forecast before other people do? All of those things. And then it just like curdles all of it.
Sure does. One of the new and exciting ways to market a book that I've seen is that the publisher Atria sponsored a TikTok user to go on the 9-month world cruise. Granted, they only sponsored 3 weeks of it.
This guy didn't even like books, right? Like, he's not a reader.
He does not like books.
They were just like, this guy's on TikTok and he's on the cruise. Let's give him some books.
And so I understand that we are desperate. The book community is desperate. We want to convert non-readers to readers. But my question is, like, does that mean we then have to send them to Antarctica?
Okay, do you know anything about the Goodreads Choice Awards?
So I think it is a good sales tool in terms of, like, I think people pay attention to those awards. I'm glad the infrastructure is not there for readers to just then go to Amazon and buy all of these books. But I do think, much like everything else, there are a few, like, awards mean more when there's less criticism.
Yeah.
And so this is like the People's Choice Awards, but for books.
Yes. Or I used to be really into the American Music Awards, which are also not critics, right? Like, but it was like televised, so I wanted to watch it. Like, I I VHS taped the one that MC Hammer hosted. I mean, when you think it matters, right? But I think it's one of those things, like you said, that like it's an award that there aren't any. It's like the Golden Globes. Like there aren't. They've changed. The Golden Globes have supposedly changed a little bit, but the old Golden Globes, it's like here's some random people who figured out how to get celebrities in a room. Like let's give this a bunch of weight, even though it doesn't have like that much weight at all.
I think Goodreads really does try to make it like voted on by you.
I wouldn't want to receive any award that I personally voted on. Hey, it's Anne. We are recording a whole bunch of episodes this month, and we want your questions. We're talking about the British royal family, like how do we talk about them, why do we talk about them, the future of reality TV, the contemporary Jennifer Lopez, and then we're doing a separate episode on Ben Affleck, but specifically through the lens of ambition. Plus, we're putting together an episode with Krista Burton, full of your wacky one-off questions that fall under Krista's expertise on strong opinions about trivial shit. So if any of these topics spark something in you, some question, head to tinyurl.com/culturestudypod and fill out the Google form. And if none of these spark your interest, head to the form anyways and tell us what episodes you want. Okay, thanks. Back to the show. Okay, our next question is about how readers use Goodreads and how that affects actual reading practices. This is from someone we'll just call H.
I feel like Goodreads takes some of the enjoyment out of reading by turning us into critics, having to analyze the books and to look for faults, thus making reading a lot more of a performance. Do you agree? And, if so, do you think the impact of Goodreads on its users differs from other reviewing websites?
Okay, I think this is so interesting because it's almost like, people used to always ask me, oh, you take film studies classes, so like, can you not enjoy your books anymore because you are always thinking about films or movies or whatever through this lens of analysis? And so there's a big part of me that thinks like, it's great to be able to analyze and to also seek enjoyment. Like keeping those two things in one place in your head, I think that's useful. But what do you think here?
Yeah. Anytime you're asked to rate something,
yes,
it's going to cheapen it in some capacity.
Right.
And yet, I think, once again, like hearing what other people think about books is such a pleasure. It's a pleasurable thing to do. One of the things that I talk about in the op-ed in the Times is somehow, and maybe it's just because it's early in the game, but I feel like Letterboxd does a really great job of allowing users to like write a sentence about a movie that may or may not actually critique what's going on. It could, and I feel like that experience is so pleasurable. Do I think that film people are just better behaved than book people? No, it can't be that. It's not that.
I'm struck by the ways in which Letterboxd, and this comes from the long history of film criticism, and even just like the aesthetics of the site is masculinized. And like there's something about the one sentence review that is masculinized, right? And contrast that. And again, we're talking like very stereotypical understandings of masculinized and feminized with like the unruliness of Goodreads, which is like overflowing with emotion and like can't behave itself and like it's given too much power. and I think that like I don't know what to do with that because I, like you, I very much prefer the Letterboxd experience to the Goodreads experience. But at the same time, I'm kind of like, we have this fetishization of brevity, of like this whole like of like certainty, right? Like this is how I feel about it. But some of it I think too is like you said, the whole like anytime you are asked to rate something, whether it's letter grades or stars, it's forcing you to, I think, have a not very nuanced reading experience.
Yeah, and I think to go back again to the decline of criticism, criticism was there to explore the nuance. The best kind was.
Right.
And so even if you felt 4 stars about a book, you could still read a review and say like, oh, this wasn't satisfying, but I don't know what the author was intending here. And I think that all goes hand in hand.
Yeah, I think that a really good review now, if I don't know what the author, did they like the book? I don't know. Were they interested in the book? Yeah. That sort of nuance is part of the allure of the review itself. And I think that the worst kind of review, and you see this both in the pages of something like the New York Times Book Review and on Goodreads, is like a compliment sandwich almost, where it's like, I like this, and then the paragraph where it talks about its faults, because you have to have the paragraph.
Towards the end, you do the one paragraph.
And then, kind of like a half-assed ending that's like, books, interesting. I think that part of this is just, I guess we should return to the author's question instead of us just talking about these things. But do you think that it's useful for readers themselves to take this approach when you're reading a book, when you pick up a book, that you have to also formulate what you're going to say about that book? Or is it maybe they should just formulate what they're going to say in their mind? Do you know what I mean? I don't know.
100%. I think Goodreads is a nice part of a reading experience, or it could be a nice part. But what you think about a book can be a really personal thing that you might not be able to articulate why it moves you. Yeah. And that's okay too.
And I think sometimes that you can say, I was really moved by this book and I don't have words for it. But that's the sort of thing that maybe that doesn't have a place on Goodreads.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Because you have to give it a rating. Yeah. Melody has a question from the side here, which is that, have you ever encountered the problem where you read a book and you thought you had some feelings about it, and then you sign on to Goodreads and then see the average rating, and then it changes how you think about the book?
Yes, but I will say that happens to me with book coverage of any kind.
Yeah.
I will think that I have an idea in my head of what I thought about something, and then I'll read a review and it'll change my mind. And truly, one of the reasons I loved doing my podcast was talking to authors each week about what their intentions were in the writing of the book and their inspirations. And it always changes my reading of the book.
Melody says in the chat, okay, this makes me feel better. Thank you. Yeah, I think criticism is interesting that way. It can make you rethink some of your thoughts. And also, if your criticism or your thinking on the book stands up, if you read all the other things and you're like, well, that's interesting that they had a different experience, but I still hold on to my experience of the book, that's useful too.
Absolutely.
I mean, I even think about this in terms of books that win awards. I often go in with the expectation this is going to be good. And so how do I form my opinion of the book in spite of whatever award it has won? And I actually just finished a National Book Award winner that I really was hoping to love, and I didn't. And I was like, I still have taste, right? I don't just like books.
You're not just a robot there.
Yeah.
That is also useful. I mean, one of the things that I think is interesting now is that there isn't a monoculture in book awards so much.
Yeah.
And so once again, it does kind of rely on the judgment of a few judges who are individual people with specific tastes. And I think that is exciting, but also doesn't entirely guarantee quality all the time.
So our next question is from Neely, and this is about the function of online reviews in general. So I'm glad that you already brought up monoculture.
Is there a middle ground for good book reviews between monoculture? In this case, I'm generalizing as old school white cis men determining what's worthy, and our own echo chambers, as in Book Talk and Goodreads. And does it matter?
Okay, so I think about this constantly. I think about it with my own newsletter. Like, what if people are only getting their recommendations from like me and like another newsletter that is in many ways similar to mine and where we always recommend the same things, like there's that cross-pollination that can make someone think, "Oh, I'm reading all the good stuff," right?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I just like how where's the middle ground here? Like I understand the liberatory potential of Goodreads and TikTok and Book Talk just generally, but then I also think that sometimes it's really great to have someone who is a practice critic like you writing in public forums.
And there are some really, really great publications out there, and I will name a few.
Yes, please.
Book Forum is one of my favorites. The LA Review of Books, Four Columns, which is a website for all sorts of arts criticism, but their book reviews are really insightful.
Yeah.
LitHub doesn't do straight book criticism, but it does have constantly great conversations about something related to books that you might want to read. And they even run a site called bookmarks.reviews. And if you go there, it's almost like a Rotten Tomatoes, where you can see pull quotes from all of the major reviews that a book received. And I find that's helpful, even just to see the pull quote. And if I am intrigued by it, I will go back and read the review and know that critic is someone who I either do or don't want to follow.
Yeah, I find that following, like figuring out whose opinions challenge me and who I don't always agree with, but often agree with. Or like often if I follow their recommendation or the books that they're reading, like that is useful to me. There's a couple people who I follow on Instagram who do essentially like, one of them is my cousin who is a children's book publisher in Minnesota. But I just like, I like having a stream of things that are making me see like, oh, well, here's a book that I should try out, or here's a book that I could think about, or those sorts of things, like following individuals. And that's old school, right? Like you follow a book critic instead of you follow like types of books or the award winners or any of the other categories that the Amazon might provide. What about for like I find that this is harder when it comes to genre fiction.
Yeah, I think that's right.
It's often delegitimized by like the high reviewers. And so how do you get out of the echo chamber there?
I think Tor.com has some really great writing on sci-fi and fantasy. I am not caught up enough on romance, but I do know that there is smart writing out there about romance to be found if you seek it out. But yeah, it's very siloed, I would say.
I think podcasts kind of fill this role a little bit, but it's less in that understanding of like the straight review and more in the like, we're going to have a conversation about this book. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think that's kind of fine in terms of like, do I want to be a part of this conversation?
Yeah. And I think that's maybe like the middle ground that we're trying to figure out here is that one of the things that the older school of book criticism did not necessarily allow for is that conversation is a place for the reader in that conversation, other than just like, well, I'm going to read the book and maybe come up with some opinions. And now we're getting a little bit more of the reader in that conversation. But then Goodreads is an example of what happens when the reader
is shouting.
There's no place for the critic. There's only the place for the reader, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, so the last question is like, if people are so annoyed with Goodreads, if they hate it so much, this is similar to like Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, whatever, like, why don't they just stop using it? Like, why do people just continue to have their toxic relationship with Goodreads?
I think once you're there, it's it's like I should have quit Twitter by now too, but something brings me back each time. And I have joined Blue Sky as a Twitter alternative, and so I've joined Storygraph as an alternative to Goodreads, and there are a couple of other really great competitors, but they're small.
Right.
They're not where everyone is. And unfortunately, that is a part of the allure.
Yeah. The critical mass, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that there is any potential for Amazon to turn the ship around?
Yeah. There is. I don't think it's likely that they will, but my op-ed asks for them to have more humans and to pay their volunteer librarians actual money to communicate with publishers in a helpful way for everyone.
Yeah.
I think that could make a dent. I don't know if they have any interest in doing such a thing.
Right. They have so much money, but I think oftentimes in these situations, it's not even like that they don't recognize that it's broken. It's like, well, it's broken, it's fine.
It still works for them.
Right. So they're like, why not continue to make small amounts of money off of, like, there's just no imperative to try to make this into a better user experience, a harder to manipulate system. Even though some of these things are like just very basic tech stuff, like, oh, what are your protections against creating multiple accounts? Like, if Venmo can do this, like, you think that Amazon could control with various things to make sure that people can't create like 50 bot accounts that then go and review bomb someone.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think that their problem is that they don't necessarily understand themselves as something that like the value is not in making it a higher quality site. It's only an expansion.
Absolutely. And that's how I feel about so much of culture now.
I know.
And there are people out there like us who like really care and whose lives would be enriched if quality and user experience mattered.
And if there was a cool way for authors to communicate with their readers.
Absolutely. That didn't set them up.
That didn't make authors also, that didn't set them up for bad faith criticism. Like, I would love to field questions about like all sorts of things to do with the book. That would be really cool, and to get those directly from readers. But instead, I have developed a very thick skin being on the internet, as I know you have, and like, it still is wounded by Goodreads.
Yeah.
Like, I still, like, it pierces.
I mean, that's one of the first things I warn people who want to write a book or have a book coming out is don't look. Nothing good will come of looking for an author.
What good? Seriously, it's not like I'm going to read them and be like, oh, they're totally right. Like, like, I'm going to work so hard to not do that in my next book. Like, that's just going to make me feel like I should never write a book again.
I think that's the general vibe.
So what is a way that you have found that works really well to use Goodreads? Like, would you recommend your way of just like putting the books that you've read in there and only reviewing things that you actually want to endorse? Like, does that seem like a healthy strategy?
No, it's healthy for me because I'm in the industry and I don't want to make too many enemies. I want just a few enemies, like quality enemies. I don't want to just be making enemies left and right. And I do think, authors even do take the star rating system very seriously. And, if I gave someone I know a 3-star review.
Oh, Maris, if you gave me a 3-star review, I would be in my bed for 6 months or something like that. So
for me, that's what I do. But I do think I like the idea of having a general reader say what they think about a book. Like, I don't think that is inherently bad. I think it's really cool.
Yeah, I know. And I should clarify too that I don't think people should not like a book that I read. Like, no book is going to be liked by all people. That's exactly crappy if we come in that understanding. It's just that the thing about social media is that all people are exposed to way more people's opinions of them in a way that they weren't in the past. And Goodreads is part of that larger apparatus.
Absolutely.
And like, that includes not just authors, but also if you wrote a review of a book and then someone's like, no, that's bullshit. Like, whatever you thought of this book is bullshit. Like, no, that we're all part of this too. Okay, I think this is a great place to wrap up. And paid subscribers are going to get some extra time with Maris and me, answering a question about how to stop beating yourself up for not reading as much as you want to, or as much as an app wants you to. Maris, where can people find you if they want to hear more from you?
So you can find me on LitHub every other week. And I'm also, yes, I'm still on Twitter. I still call it Twitter. Who cares? At Maris Kreisman.
Thank you so much. This has been such a delight. I cannot think of anyone else I would have rather talked about this subject with. So thank you again.
Oh, thank you for having me. This was great.
Thanks for listening to the Culture Study Podcast. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We have so many great episodes in the works, and I promise you don't want to miss any of them. If you want to suggest a topic, ask a question about the culture that surrounds you, or submit a question for our subscriber-only advice time segment, go to our Google form at tinyurl.com/culturestudypod, or check the show notes for a link. If you want to support the show and get bonus content, head to culturestudypod.substack.com. It's only $5 a month or $50 a year, and you'll get ad-free episodes, an exclusive advice time segment, weekly discussion threads for each episode, and a link to a special Google form so that your questions go to the front of the line. If you're already a Culture Study newsletter subscriber, you also get 40% off. Just search your email for Culture Study subscriber podcast code, something like that, and it should come up. If you can't find it, just send me an email and we'll figure it out. Your subscriptions make the show sustainable, and if you think about it, $50 a year, we put out about 50 episodes a year. You're really paying just $1 for an episode. It's a pretty great deal. The Culture Study Podcast is produced by me, Anne Helen Peterson, and Melody Rowell. Our music is by Poddington Bear. You can find me on Instagram at Anne Helen Peterson, Melody at Melodious47, and the show at Culture Study Pod. Instead, I am reading the book that Melody badgered me to start, which is A Court of... I can't ever, like, what is it?
A Court of Thorns and Roses.
A crown of...
A Court of Thorns.
Sure.
Yeah. A Court of Thorns
how do I
and
say
Roses.
it?
Or you say Akatar.
There's just thorn. I know there's a court and a crown.
There's no crown.
But I get them mixed up, which...